In a small, isolated town, there was an antique shop that held an array of peculiar items. Among them was an ornate mirror that locals claimed was cursed. It was said that anyone who gazed into it would see not only their reflection, but also the shadow of their darkest fears lurking behind them. Curiosity drew a young woman named Clara to the shop one rainy afternoon. She had heard the stories but dismissed them as mere superstition. As she entered, the bell above the door tinkled, and the shopkeeper, an elderly man with a knowing gaze, greeted her. "Are you here for the mirror?" he asked, his voice low. Clara shrugged, a mix of intrigue and skepticism. "I'm just looking." She wandered through the shop, but her eyes kept drifting back to the mirror. Its frame was intricately carved, and the glass seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. Finally, unable to resist, she approached it. As she stood before the mirror, her heart raced. "It's just glass," she whispered to herself. But as she peered into it, her reflection wavered, and she caught a glimpse of something dark and shadowy behind her, a figure cloaked in darkness. Startled, Claire turned around, but the room was empty. She looked back at the mirror, and the shadow was gone. Shaking her head, she brushed it off as a trick of the light. Over the following days, Clara found herself increasingly drawn to the mirror. Each time she gazed into it, she felt the presence of the shadow, always lurking just beyond her reflection. It whispered to her, sowing seeds of doubt and fear. "You're not enough," it hissed. "You'll fail. They will leave you." At first, Clara resisted the words, but as time passed, the shadow's influence grew. She became consumed by insecurities, questioning her relationships and abilities. Friends began to notice her change, but she brushed them off, too ashamed to admit the truth. One night, plagued by nightmares, Claire returned to the antique shop, desperate for answers. The shopkeeper watched her closely as she entered. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "What do I do?" Clara pleaded, her voice trembling. "It won't leave me alone. The mirror reveals what lies within," he explained. "To confront the shadow, you must face your fears head-on. Only then can you break its hold." Determined, Clara spent the night reflecting on her insecurities. The next day, she gathered her friends and opened up about her struggles. "I've been battling this darkness, and I can't do it alone," she confessed. To her surprise, they rallied around her, sharing their own fears and insecurities. As they supported one another, Clara felt a flicker of hope igniting within her. That evening, she returned to the mirror, accompanied by her friends. Together, they stood before it, united. "We will face our shadows," Clara declared, her voice strong. Together, as they gazed into the mirror, the shadows began to swirl and take form, but this time they were less intimidating. The figures shifted into representations of their fears, self-doubt, loneliness, and rejection, but Clara and her friends stood firm. "We are more than our fears," Clara shouted, her confidence building. "You don't control us." The shadows writhed, their whispers growing frantic, but the group held hands tightly. "We accept you," Clara said, tears in her eyes. "But we won't let you define us." In that moment, a brilliant light burst forth from the mirror, enveloping them in warmth. The shadows shrieked, dissolving into wisps of smoke that faded away. The mirror's surface shimmered, reflecting their united strength and resilience. As the light subsided, Clara and her friends looked at each other, breathless but liberated. The mirror no longer held the same power. It had transformed into a mere reflection of their journey. From that day on, Clara embraced her imperfections, knowing that they were a part of who she was. The shadow in the mirror had taught her that facing fears was not about banishing them, but about acknowledging their presence and finding strength in vulnerability. The antique shop remained, but the mirror now served as a reminder of resilience and the power of connection. Clara and her friends would often return, not out of fear, but to celebrate their growth and the bonds that had helped them conquer the shadows within.